recording? All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee for October 30th at 11 a.m. And it is 11:01 right now. Call the meeting to order. We'll do introductions, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Meg Zalatow.
Felix Rivera.
Suzanne Grants.
Christopher Constant.
Mark Baggett with Northern Compass Group.
Roaster Jalewski Ascent.
Shauna Tomo with Northern Compass Group.
Alex Lipka, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Desiree Pacho, Assembly Budget Analyst.
Karen Welch, Deputy Director, Port of Alaska.
Jeff Poole, Jacobs Engineering.
Dave Thompson, Fort Rouge.
Ryan Zinn, Alaska-based Industries.
Craig Jacobs, Observer.
Tom Lucan, Ada.
Kelly Corroy Jacobs.
Kevin Davenport, Matson.
I know Miss Quinn Davidson is around. There she is. Miss Quinn Davidson just walked in.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
on the phone, Crystal Kennedy.
Thank you. Welcome. So the first item on the agenda is a review of the final Ascent Northern Compass Group report. Having met with the consultants yesterday, it became clear that the volume of comments that came forward was substantial, and it could be that this isn't quite the final, but that we're going to have a little conversation about some things. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Ascent and Northern Compass.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll start, just give kind of an overview. You're right, we've received quite a few comments, to say the least, which is good. That was our intent when we put the original report out. I will start by saying, if you have watched since we delivered the report in its draft form to you, the public response in the sense of how it's been covered both locally, around the state, and also nationally has been a very positive turn, which is was, if you recall, one of our concerns was how do you move this from a kind of a, oh my God, it's 1.8 billion, never going to be done, to, oh, there might be some opportunity. And I think the press has done a good job reporting the facts, reporting what the report laid out, and has given a much better public perception of where it could go based on decisions you all make and the mayor makes over the next few months here. I think it's important, again, to remind you as we finish up this report, you're right, we have received well over 350 comments, some technical, some very substantial. We have worked through them. The report does still continue to show that there are significant savings potential on this project, $600 to $800 million, depending on what direction you take. As we continue to sift through the comments, you'll see some things we've incorporated, and Ro will go in more detail on some of the highlights, that stuff that we just fundamentally disagree with, on how we saw the information that we looked at on behalf of the Assembly and the direction could be. There's also important parts of the report that, again, hopefully today is some more conversation about it. There are decision points that have to continue to be made in this process. Without those, you'll find yourself still in this situation of a port that you cannot build because the costs are prohibitive. And so
Just
it's really
quickly would note that Mr. Wellington has arrived.
And so when we look at this, again, there's kind of two choices. You can kind of keep on the path you're not necessarily you're on, but the path that is going forward, and have this price poured up to the $1.9 billion that is not achievable, or you choose a new path. And that's what we've tried to lay out in the report, that again we believe can incorporate $600 to $800 million or more in savings. Part of the key is, again, port user alignment, administration alignment with them, and assembly alignment on how this will work and the strategies that are necessary. I will tell you, as we have put this out, we constantly, even as early as this morning, Ro got commentary from people on some ideas that could help, again, move the cost of the project down and make it a much more efficient project. I'm going to let Ro talk about, again, some highlights, but let me I'm going to give you one example. This is, how we sometimes will disagree in our final report, which you'll get in a hard copy in short order, but just to give you a sense, and the administration was very thorough. I saw Bill come in a little bit ago, very thorough on several recommendations in 4-point type, but very helpful. But here's an example where we will disagree, and I'll just talk about the money end of it. And again, there's stuff we agreed with too that we incorporated, but here's the comment. Building a plan of finance that assumes significant state or federal funding has been and remains a challenge, given the unpredictability of those funding sources and the fact that they are beyond our control. The comment was we would welcome further thoughts on what credible assumptions are. Well, we come with the view that you have to have that. Because if you don't have state or federal dollars at all in this, then you might as well design a port about $600 million, which is almost impossible based on some of the niche. You might have to even be lower than that. So you have to, when we looked at these comments, we took them as comments. We don't necessarily say that's a disagreement with us, but we believe what we've laid out is a reasonable, practical approach of how to go after this. But just having the plan doesn't mean it will happen. You have to actually do stuff around it to make it happen. And we would not put those in there. If you recall how we did it, one of the things I know that the chairman asked for is kind of a chart which will be in your final report, which kind of gives that narrative we did in a much more visible way this way in regards to funding. Why did we do that? Because we looked at every funding source to determine what we base on our experience, what's reasonable and what's possible in doing. And I've had conversations recently yesterday with the chief of staffs of our delegation, as well as some others, on some of these projects. Because I think there are pieces to the puzzle here. But I just want to make sure as we finalize the report, it's not that we're going to necessarily answer every single one with this is why. We believe we've answered that question in our report by our analysis of how we came about the funding strategies. But let me pause there, and I'm going to turn it to Roe. He's going to walk through again some of those broad sweeps. And then I think really what we want to do is kind of finalize any commentary or questions you all might have, and then put this into a hard copy and then deliver it to you. But there are steps you need to continue to move forward. I know you have one item, for example, on the docket today. So.
And like Mark indicated at the end of what he talked about, we wanted to provide one more opportunity for dialogue between the assembly and us before we finalized the report. And so last time we had given the report in advance, but just in advance. Hopefully there's been a little bit more time to assimilate the information we did, and that if we potentially could either answer other questions or hit other issues, we wanted to provide that opportunity. It really has been a great experience over the last month in terms of the interaction that we've had with different people in terms of getting comments, and it's been very helpful, and it's definitely improved, I think, the quality of the report by people pointing out either errors that we've made or things that were potentially less than clear, or things that were that they disagreed with. And so that dialogue has been great. I've had, and I really want to congratulate Bill Falsey for leadership in terms of meeting with, having his team meet with me. They provided extensive comments, and we went over them item by item, and I think it was clearly very helpful to me to understand more information from them, and hopefully there was also some benefit that I was able to articulate my issues better to them. But I found it very, very helpful, and really appreciate Bill's leadership in that. So the biggest things that really, from my view, that have occurred during the comment period that was there's probably two major issues. One of the issues, the first one was related to what's known as a Section 408 permit, and I had raised questions prior to the PCT about the certain things in the core permit, and just in the last week or so we've gotten a thorough analysis by the project team, and so there was discussion with the Corps in getting the 408 permit, which basically one of the assumptions was at the end of the day that they would reduce the dredging by moving the pier line out, and then also cutting it off at the north end in lieu of additional maintenance dredging being done at the in the PCT area. So we did the transitional dredging. The Corps will maintain that, but their expectation was that they would be able to reduce the amount of other maintenance dredging in the future, and so it makes it more complicated to do the rebuild in place portion, like I had indicated in the reports. And it also, another portion of that discussion, it increases the likelihood that the southerly portion of the north extension would need to come out. So you know, that it shifts the dynamic somewhat, but it's still, like Mark indicated in his discussion, right now we have a $1.9 billion program, not affordable. We got to do something different. So I still think, even though that issue is there, it's still, we need to look at what those other options are.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. And so what is the cost of removing the southern portion of the northern extension?
So it's roughly, the current estimate is, it's on the order of magnitude of 125 million plus or minus. The original amount was lower than that, and there potentially would be, you know, different solutions, but it's, you know, it's a large, you know, a large potential cost. The other larger element that I consider is on the other side of the equation, in terms of, I've been investigating the potential for an alternate pile advancement solution versus the impact and vibratory hammers that are currently there. I just actually had a meeting today with a equipment manufacturer supplier that they install helical piles. So instead of using vibratory or impact hammers, you advance the piles through drilling, and so that there's less noise that would be potentially more attractive from a, you know, a NIMS permitting perspective. The project team had evaluated these, and they basically, the technology to install 48-inch piles, it hasn't really been done before, and they were looking at larger diameter piles, but it could very well work in either a batter pile solution or a replacement pile solution for existing piling. So I think that's definitely, you know, something that I would like to see the project team investigate more.
Well, if I might, wasn't the original north extension helical pile system? Wasn't that part of the concept?
Well,
I saw drawings for that at some point.
so
P&D is original.
that was closed. So, well, the P&D solution was an open cell sheet pile.
Right.
The Jacobs solution was to take out the open cell sheet pile and put in a closed shell sheet pile, which basically are circular groups of piling. So this, when I talk about helical pile, what these are, they're basically just like a standard pipe pile, but they have fins on them and basically it's like a drill. So they put pressure on top of the pile and they drill it into the ground rather than bang on the top of it. So
I know somewhere in the past there are helical piles. I've seen the drawings for it. That's down a rabbit hole, but let's proceed.
So there is a proprietary system that related to P&D that they call them spin fin piles. So I don't know if that may be what it is. I've seen those used on other projects. This is a different, it's a bit different in terms of the application and the way that you install them. So there were a lot of, there's commonality in terms of the discussions that I had with the city and even with other people. So there were suggestions that were provided that I've incorporated. There are suggestions that were provided that I've just not included in the report. One of the things I wanted to relay was just some of the differences at the end of the day that to me are relatively material between what I've heard from the city and where I am in the final report. And part of that, the reason for conveying those is ultimately, the Assembly is going to have a role, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to discuss some of those.
Ro, before we get into material differences, let Mr. Dunbar ask his question.
That was going to be my question.
Okay.
So, there are. I went on a trip recently, and I took your report, and I took the administration's questions. I had all in a binder, and I read, good. I was reading through the whole thing, and then I lost it on the plane on the way back. But what struck me was just, there are like basic factual differences where you assert one thing and they say, no, you have this wrong. And, like fairly major things where it's like either some technical point you have wrong or some misunderstanding of how we got to where we are. And how are you going to reconcile those kind of things?
Well, in terms of the way that I've reconciled them is I've gone over individually each one of those comments with the municipality, and I've worked them out in terms of a clearer understanding what their point is. In some instances, I've given additional documentation to the municipality to support what my assertions were. There are errors that I've made in my report. I was not. So I have. What I've done is I've incorporated what I agree with in terms of their comments into the report. I've gone over areas that I've disagreed with them. I've given them documentation to some effect, but as of now, I'm not planning on doing any sort of a point-by-point rebuttal of what their comments were. So what I believe that the final report that will be presented to me is factual and accurate. Now, if you ask Ryan, Jeff, Bob, there probably wouldn't necessarily be full exact agreement on all of the points that I'm going to be included in the report. But we've worked through we've talked at depth in terms of understanding what the reviewers' perspectives were and what my perspective was, and in a lot of in where I've agreed with them, I've clearly done that. Where they've even when there's points where my information isn't accurate, or my information may have been accurate, but it didn't clearly present all the information, I've tried to add additional information to it, in the exact language, really to capture what their points were. So, but I'm not planning on doing like a specific point by point. Here's where they're wrong, or here's what I disagree with, or any of that.
Yeah, and I think Mark stated it really plainly that they're going to let the report speak for itself on those facts, their opinion of those facts. Mr.
Well, so I have two questions. One of you, or I guess of the Assembly leadership, and then one of Roe. My question for the leadership is, what's the mechanism by which we accept this?
That's it.
And is it going to be an AM or some other? What's actually going to be the tool that we do so? And is it going to be, when we do that acceptance, is there going to be an implication that we agree with everything in the report, or simply that we say, okay, we have received your report?
My plan for this is an AIM, and that would be just a motion to accept, just like we would with an audit from Michael or any number of other reports that come our way. I think that's the approach that we should take, and then any memorandum or resolution that comes forward from it should be specific on the merits of whatever it is.
Well, I would ask, and I don't know if this is what could happen. I don't see the clerk here, but on the AIM, because it's a unique AIM. And this is a really big report on a really big topic. I would like some additional language there, making clear that we aren't saying this is like the gospel, or you know what I mean. That we don't necessarily we're accepting it, but we're not agreeing with everything in there necessarily.
We can say that, but the motion does that.
No, I know,
And
but
so-
I just wanted to be a little more explicit for the public, because the way it was reported, I would say
I'll make
you're
sure
right.
you
It
get a
was
draft.
what's that?
I'll
Yeah.
make sure you get a draft.
So, and to go back to you, Rose. So the way it was reported in the press, or at least the article I saw, was positive, but it also, to me, was a little bit sort of rose-colored glasses. It was like, this consultant has found that we can have these $1 billion of savings, you know. And there are points in your report, and again, I wish I had my actual notes in here, but there was one point I remember you say, like, something about it's either value engineering or something like that. And you say this could achieve $200 or $300 million of savings, something like that. And the administration says, tell us what you mean by that. You know, give us specifics, because just saying it's going to save these hundreds of millions of dollars doesn't mean we know how to do what you're asking. So, with those kind of comments, are you providing more detail? And I admit that we haven't maybe paid you enough to provide that detail, but I mean, are you able to provide more detail where they specifically say, show us how to turn $200 or $300 million, you know, find these savings you claim can be found?
There were two comments that related to dollars. Define the $600 to $800 million in savings, and I believe that the report goes over aggregate. It goes over individual items that you can. That there's information in the report that supports that $600 to $800 million, and I haven't done any change there. And then the $200 million question, I don't remember that exact.
Yeah, and I apologize. I could be misremembering, but I seem to remember there being a place near the early on.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, I think what is important is you'll see those commentaries. You're right, the press reports that kind of broad number. In the summary, executive summary, you'll see that commentary on the big number. Throughout the report in cumulative fashion, as what I think is clear of what Rose was talking about, each one of these, that's why it's pretty extensive. We believe, you know, there's several million here, several million here, and we detail it, but we don't then do a whole sheet that says, here's a deduct, you know, here's the shopping list. We have said in the report, there are steps that should happen, but we've gotten, and I know Rose is going to say this, I'm probably still in a little bit of this thunder here, there are items that we believe need further reporting and work, and the response to that, we've done it, we're not doing it. That doesn't make sense to us. For example, the two phases of the PCT, we have seen significant differences in the engineer's bid and what actually came in. Matter of fact, the second phase, since we had the meeting here last time, has come down 20 million like that. So one of the recommendations we're saying is, okay, we believe we are on the right track by specifying very significant savings throughout the document in pockets. What needs to happen is some more engagement with the consulting group that the city has to go and re-examine their numbers to do that. So I, you know, of course, you're right that, you know, if we were, you know, doing this in a different way, you'd have lots of schematics, charts, you have all kinds of number crunchers working, but we believe based on the information we have and others, there is, and we would say, you know, be frank with you, the assembly has to put those glasses on, because you can't do a $1.9 billion project. You'll never do it. So you have to have a fiscally constrained project, which means at the end of the day, if I took that comment that I read here earlier to you all and said, okay, we're going to really lowball federal and state dollars to almost nothing, then your fiscally constrained project is $400 or $500 million. So that's it, that's your project. So the response you would have, at least the way we would recommend it, is you go to Jacobs and say, this is all we have. Design the port that meets that number. But even that kind of recommendation is not being fully embraced. We think you have to change this model. But we do believe that the numbers are based on the work that Rose done and getting a lot of information from the administration, a lot, and from the contractor. So we believe these are realistic and achievable. Because if you don't achieve that, you can't get this port done. That's the dilemma. You're kind of, it's a cost-driven, or, you know, in the sense of here's what we're going to do, or it's a income-driven, meaning this is all we have. That's a fundamental shift. And you got to make the shift in order to get to the project. If you leave it in this process you're in now, you're kind of hoping at the end of the road, this will by magic shrink down. But the better approach, I think we're coming to this conclusion, is here's how much you have. You go to Jacobs and the company, and they do this all, this would not be new to them, maybe on this project, but it's not new, where you say, this is it. This is the number. Based on the formulas that we've laid out, what's predictable over the next 7, 10 years of revenue stream. It's a fundamental shift.
So let me try also just in a different way. So the report that we've generated doesn't give you exactly what you, I mean, what does the exact solution that you would use to employ to get to the end, and part of that is because, you know, we haven't done some basic review. The project team hasn't necessarily done that. For example, like looking at the replacement in kind, we haven't done that. So you can't say that is the best solution until you go through and do a review. And so, but we've laid out a path that you can do that.
Yeah.
So so the so the report contains a number of recommendations on how you move forward, and as part of that, you're going to you're going to refine what that ultimate solution could be, and it could be the at the end of the day, it could prove that replacement in kind of existing structures is not feasible, and that in fact that the solution is move the dock face out 140 feet as was proposed by the administration. I still think that there's a good chance that it could be viable, even with this Section 408 issues that I've raised, that we would be able to do that. But it's not the exact solution isn't defined yet, but there's a path that we've laid out that I believe that can help get there. Now, with respect to the specific, that the $200 to $300 million issue, that had to do, and it was somewhat, I mean, in my view, it was an accurate comment. It was accurate, but it was somewhat controversial, and it had to do with the what is the seismic premium? And there's both Jacobs and, in fact, I got an email from Jeff just yesterday on this, not on that exact facet, but of looking at how do you really know the difference between what is that seismic premium? So that specific comment that you've questioned had to do with if you look at, so there were portions of the costs that were used in the PCT that went to the non-seismic enhanced other projects like the petroleum terminal and the Matson terminal. And so if you take all of those additional costs into consideration and you aggregate those with the additional clear seismic costs at the PT or the PCT and also the new tote berth, if you add all those costs together, you get to the magnitude of the $200 to $300 million. Now that's a specific response to a specific question that I'd gone over with the project team, and I still believe it's accurate, and I verbally went over my thinking with them, and I just kept the report as written in that particular example.
And that is fundamental to your, if I correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's the part of the big question there is what's your seismic premium?
Thank you, Mark and
What's your
Ro.
capacity?
And just to note, Mr. Dyson has arrived, and I have Mr. Whittleton in the queue.
Thanks. On your, I wonder if you'd be able to even on the city's comments and others, is just maybe just put change or no change. So we wouldn't have to write an essay, but that would be helpful. There's so many. We can
Yeah.
say, okay,
Yeah, we
these
can do
ones
that.
will change.
So, and actually, you know, I mean, what I've done is I've color coded them, and basically, you know, so, you know, pink is, I've incorporated it if it has an X, and orange I disagree with, green let's talk about, so I've done
We can
that.
do that.
Will we get color copies? Or we?
Yes.
We're on a budget, so we'll give you.
I'll take a pass through that.
Yeah,
So.
we can do that.
Table can have
That's a
colors.
good point.
So, other questions? Ms. Alzo?
Thank you. I want to make sure I understood how you just explained the calculation of the seismic premium. So I'm going to restate it back and tell me
Okay.
if I'm wrong. That it's 200 to 300 million, presuming or extrapolating from what was designed and accepted in the PCT, and then just applying it to the current designs that we have for tow, mats and berths and everything else. Did I get that right? I don't think I did.
So I presented an analysis of the seismic premium, and by recollection, it was more on the, you know, generally on the order of about $70-some million. I had a sentence in there that said, if you took into the, you know, so there's a whole range of different factors that created the cost, and then, you know, it's a matter of what bucket do you put them in. Do you put them in seismic premium, or do you put them in something else? So what that sentence related to, if you take what I would consider to be seismic premium, and if you add in the related component of that had to do with using PCT costs, including the seismic premium, and allocated them, if you put those into the seismic premium bucket, you're into the $200 to $300 million range. But on the base analysis, I'm saying it's more like, you know, $70 million premium.
So your answer is yes, but again, you have the core, as you said, premium that it's estimating around 70, but it has a ripple effect, because if you do those higher standards, then there's other things you must do. And that is then incorporated to this bigger number. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I'll say for my purposes, I don't like the term seismic premium. I prefer seismic resiliency. So, just
Okay.
had to-
But do you
I see
does that
what
make
you're
sense?
saying. Yeah.
Because if you don't do the seismic resiliency, premium I like, but you won't have to do many other things. It's a two-part component.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Costa. So please remind me if you reached the conclusion that Madsen and Tote had to have two separate berths, because I had an argument. I talked to a Tote guy again a week and a half ago, and it just seems sort of maddening to me that we can't figure out a way to have one place where they could both use. What was your ultimate conclusion on that?
Well, my recommendation on that was that one of the recommendations was do a additional study to really look at the logistics of that information. And I think, Mark, you have some recent information that you've gotten.
Yeah, so, in this process, you can imagine, so remember, we've got a lot of people who give us input, solicited and unsolicited. But one of the largest single shippers that utilizes one of the companies, so Madsen, I can't expose this who it is, but they recognize from their end as a user, this same day stuff is a nightmare for them. They've dealt with it for 40+ years. So they're using their horsepower to have a conversation with the shipper. But these are conversations that need to be structured and focused. So we think there is huge savings in figuring out not only the scheduling, but how you integrate this with the plan that maybe down the road you may have to expand because you have bigger economies or so on. But there is really a lot of interest in it. But, you know, the companies aren't gonna just do it because they have all these customers.
Right.
So the key was to have a conversation with one of the largest, if not the largest customer, who is highly interested in seeing these changes. So, but, you know, as we do the report, part of the you know, the challenge that we face, we're somewhat frustrated, to be frank with you, that has to happen every single day because they are planning for next year and 5 years out. So we think there is huge savings there.
And one additional thing, but the other thing that the report addressed was that I presented a technical solution that would accommodate a future joint use terminal. So if you were to install a sheet pile structure adjacent to the shore and connect that directly to the dock, you would be able to accommodate both low and row operations. And so what it basically did is it punted and said, you know, here's something that you could do that could accommodate that, but you'd still need to work through issues that Mark,
the back end logistics
before you would be able to actually implement that.
So the report made no conclusion that wasn't possible.
That it wasn't possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible.
It's
But again,
possible.
but why we lay these
That's your
out
question was.
is because we believe there's additional work to be done to get to the answer. And we weren't really tasked with that, but we think there's some, in the last few months, there's a lot more awareness by the consumer ends of the companies that utilize these services say, what can we do to help figure this all out? And I think it's a unique opportunity.
That's one way to save them money to their customers.
That's exactly what they
That's
see.
the bottom
They
line.
see a bottom line, and they see better, instead of just 2 days a week, they will have potentially, if they can figure this all out, 3 or 4 days options, which is critical for some of these companies that are utilizing services that have to be very quick turnaround of product.
So for the record, Mr. Presverdia has entered the room, and I have 2 questions. If there are no rules right now. One, and these are more technical about the project that I understand now, having read your report pretty closely. We made some assumptions in the project where we have increased the height of the dock by 4 feet for sea level increases due to climate change, and at the same time we've increased substantially the protection for ice and icing, which seem to be 2 conflicting elements. Why are we making investments in both? Did you get a chance to run that question down?
I think it's a valid question, and you know, and I've had some brief discussions with that. I have not advanced that issue since my discussion with you. So you could, you know, technically you could have both. You could have colder, I mean, you know, the Anchorage climate, you could have potentially more ice, and you could also have, from a, you know, global warming perspective, you could have higher sea levels. I'm in agreement with basically with, you know, what the question is, and they seem at odds, and particularly because the anecdotal discussions with marine contractors that the amount of ice in Cook Inlet is significantly lower. There's significantly less ice than there was 30 and 40 years ago, and that the onset of ice in the season is typically later than it has, and so I think it's a great question that Chris has posed, is, you know, why are we doing both of those?
So I would love to have some understanding of the rationale behind that from someone with expertise. And then the second question, which is a similar vein. I have been now on a tour under the port, and I have seen lots of photographs. And the weak point in our experience with this dock is the welds, right? And so I raised the question of why in the world do we go to such a thickness of steel that we have to quadruple even the welds? Because we're going from a 40-foot section with one weld to 8-foot sections that are welded at every chunk. If the welds are the weak spot, is it enough to say that thicker steel will provide a buffer from that same fault being the breakdown in 40 years? Right, that's a very serious question for me, because we've gone through a great effort to use these thicker steel pilings that require a special implement to put them into the ground, and they are exponentially higher in volume of weak spots, in my opinion. I would love to understand if you had a chance to run that down too.
I mean, Chris and I had gone over that comment, and it was a comment in my report. And you know, there are more welds, but the project also has good corrosion external protection that has a that protects against the welds, and they have a very elaborate corrosion protection solution that, you know, there's an 8-inch thickness in the steel. There's additional protection on the outside, so there's levels of protection against that. But you still, like Chris indicates, you still have there's more welds that are potentially at risk. So I don't think it's not a clearly, easily answerable solution, and possibly the project team could articulate more clearly on that.
I would guess one argument is that there's only so much weld at the low tide line where the corrosion is proven to be, but it certainly would be valuable to have an understanding of why the decision was made. All right, Mr. Dyson.
Just very realistic. The problem with the welds is it ends up being a place where the corrosion is much more likely to happen. Generally not a structure thing. When we're dealing like this earthquake resistance kind of thing, once you start talking about safety, it tends to get kind of emotional rather than factual. And are there standards for earthquake resistance for port structures nationally?
Yes, the project has adopted the design of what is basically state of the art in terms of terminal design, which is ASCE 6114, and that, I mean, that is, you know, basically state of the art in terms of the design. That is one of the comments where I wanted to, you know, I have a list of things that I said I disagreed with, and that's something I disagree with, the potential for that to be applied in changing the code to accept that into the code. And the concern that I would have, not that it's not a good standard, but doing something that potentially would preclude your ability to do renovation in kind of existing structures. I think we need to figure out ways that we can create an affordable report. And my concern would be if we adopt that and it was applied by the building official, that potentially could affect the ability to renovate in place, which I think would be a mistake.
Yeah, so, if I may continue, that answer is a really good information. You answered a question I didn't ask but should have, which is to your credit. But as you know, onshore stuff, they say you got to build for a 7.0 or 8.0 earthquake or whatever. Is there something like that in the offshore codes?
Yes, and it's I mean, the design earthquake is above 9.
Okay.
And under the PCT, we designed that for what was known as minimal damage, which,
Yep.
and the tote berth is also anticipated to be designed to that same level.
All right, so if somebody will say, well, why don't you design for 11 or whatever, and, it's how safe you want to be and what are the trade-offs and the add-ons because of throwing that thing in, and ability to modify and go forward with expansion is something we have to weigh.
That's right.
In all of this. So, a question we should ask ourselves if we go to, as Mr. Szarjalewski may be recommending, is not the ultimate standard and so on, do we incur any liability in case if something bad happens and our clients say, why didn't you do, X is the question you always ask. How safe, at what probabilities, is it 100-year event or something? Do you happen to know what the port of San Francisco is? I mean, they're right on an earthquake, anti-earthquake fault too.
I believe that they use the similar codes in terms of design, where the difference in application is establishment of the performance levels that you need to meet at the different earthquakes. And we are, from my knowledge, we have established the highest performance levels of anywhere in the U.S. So they would be lower in terms of their performance levels of, if you look at what we required for the PCT.
Yeah, thank you, sure.
So really, we're out of time. I'm going to last comment from Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on Mr. Dyson's comment, I think it would be helpful if we had a separate conversation regarding seismic resiliency and what would be appropriate for our community. One concern that I would have with this is, as you mentioned, one, we have to build to our budget, but we don't have a budget yet because it's largely, to some degree, it's speculative, because if we build to what we have, we won't meet the needs of the community and the stakeholders. So we're relying on possibly state support, federal support, and I know that there are requirements for standards too that are tied to that kind of funding as well. And it just makes me a little bit uneasy when we get too far into, I know you're an engineer, Mr. Dyson, into engineering issues without some basis of terminology and concepts for the discussion.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can give a quick response. Your point for your body has to make your own decisions on that. But again, I go back to, you cannot do this project without additional funding sources.
Right.
And it is a budget. This is, you do your budget every year. You have first quarter budget revisions, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, because you have changes and the dynamics change. But you have to figure out what that number is, and then, because if you decide, as Ro just described, you will have the most resilient port in the nation. Is that the right thing for everything you need to do? Maybe, maybe not, but that comes with a number. Can you get to a high level, still have great performance, and have a port that can sustain what you need in sense of earthquakes? That's another question. But at the end of the day, you only have this much money. So if you said as a body, here's how much we think we can spend over the next 10 years on this project. You say 1.9, never going to happen. But you say X number, as you're suggesting, then you would go to your in-house group that's on contract, and you would say, what level of earthquake protection can we get with these other parameters we want with this port? Help us figure that out. That is, to be frank, but they get paid a lot of money to do, and I don't mean to pick on them, but they are a great company, internationally and nationally. But that's, so it's kind of you can't answer one without the other. Because if you say you want this highest level, then you got a number. Then you got to give up something else, but if you don't know the revenue because you're on the budget, you're caught in this dilemma. And so, we would argue, figure out what that top number, gross number is over a period of time, and then turn back to the administration and the contractor and say, here's some things you care as an assembly are important.
So-
May I quick follow-up? I just would want to say, I'm not suggesting we just go straight to the highest level of seismic
Right.
resiliency, but as a body, we have some discussion as to what's appropriate for here.
Absolutely. But that's what you have now.
Right.
You have the highest level.
And
Right.
so, bottom line is, we will continue on the path to building the absolute best port that we can afford.
And safe.
And to that, we're going to switch topics to one of the planks that was proposed in the report, which is to work to broaden the coalition that supports our efforts. And so to that effect, there's a resolution drafted between Ms. LaFrance and Chair Rivera, if you would like to put it on the table.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. LaFrance and I, in conjunction with some suggestions and comments from Mr. Constant and Mr. Falsey, came up with this resolution. And in short, what this resolution does is it frames the discussion to not focus solely on the Port of Alaska, but to focus on building a statewide coalition so that when we go to the legislature, they are much more likely to look into this issue. Of note, some years ago, the Assembly did put forward a resolution specific to the Port of Anchorage, as it was called then. And that resolution went down in flames at AML because it was very specific to the Port of Anchorage. So this is, I think, taking a different tact, and if the members have any comments or thoughts on it, would enjoy that. What we're looking at is having this put forward for adoption at the floor on next Tuesday, and then we need to have this before the Resolutions Committee of AML on November 20th, with at least 5 different municipalities supporting having this brought to the floor of AML at their conference, where they will get a chance to vote on this. So with that.
And so I would just add that what this would be appended to either a resolution or a memorandum from the body that
Yep.
would cover it. And then, so just for the matter of, so when people understand the method. Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davison.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So would we get other cities to pass independent resolutions supporting this as well, theoretically, or AML would, to show broad support?
Through the chair, yeah, we could ask other municipalities to pass resolutions.
And it seems like if that's the message AML is trying to send, they'd want to get broad support. And then it doesn't mention an amount in here. So just curious, is that because we don't know the amount, or do we want to recommend some range? I mean, if we're asking them to do something specific, it seems like it's not very specific.
Yeah. I think the answer for that should be AML. It would be us to come up with that number. And
but this is AML's resolution, right?
It's going in draft format, so yeah, we would hand it to them.
Yeah, and I think it would be a much broader conversation with the rest of the parties, the rest of the municipalities around the state, around what is an appropriate amount to ask the legislature. And then just having talked with some legislators already about this, they want to know exactly how the pie is going to get divvied up. And I mean, that's going to be a big part of the discussion.
And so Suzanne and Pete will sort of keep us in the loop through AML. Is that how? Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Well, and it has been requested by the members of AML that more than just them go on the day when this is up, that as many people as possible go and kind of do the work that's necessary to build the support at the conference. We will be out of town. So Mr. Peterson and Mr. Dyson, that'll be it. We're running out of time. Okay, Peterson, Dyson, Weddleton, and then one comment from the public. Someone came and asked to be heard, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when I was down lobbying the legislature to try to get money for the port a couple of sessions ago, when I spoke to legislators, they, to a person, said, well, I have ports in my district and they need X amount of maintenance as well. So, you know, it was very difficult to get them to come on board to support the port of Anchorage in those days. And so I think this is a good approach to try to increase our chances of getting it passed through the legislature. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. Not including Dutch Harbor on this, on Alaska, it just seemed very strange. I think the biggest fishing port in the world, and John and I's favorite port of Whittier, an amazing amount of freight comes in, including all the dangerous stuff coming to South 48. So I would encourage those to be included.
And we would be happy to receive emails and comments before Tuesday. Please maybe direct them to the clerk to avoid any open meetings issues, and then we'll get those incorporated into the draft before it comes forward. Thank you. And finally, Mr. Boutine, I think your name is?
Yeah, I'll just be in here. I know we have time constraint. Tom Boutine, Executive Director of ADA. Yesterday, some people asked me if I would just stop by. They have seen a pro forma spreadsheet, the PCT, that might have been being used for developing changes to the tariffs. And that spreadsheet showed that there would be a $50 million 50-year loan or perhaps bond issue from ADA with certain other terms. And I just wanted to say preliminary talks haven't really taken place. Some people from the port and from the Muni are coming over to ADA next week. ADA has a pretty well understood process that begins with an application and eventually goes to either a loan committee or an investment committee, and then always goes to the ADA board. Sometimes requires legislative authorization. That process hasn't begun. At some point in that process, people would have a term sheet. That term sheet would specify a final maturity. I can almost guarantee that wouldn't be 50 years. It might be 15 years. I can also say that I'd be skeptical there'd be any capitalized interest, and as I understand this pro forma statement, it shows 6 years of capitalized interest. So anyway, discussions are yet to begin, and there was a concern by some people who called me that there might be an impression someplace that things are further down the road than they are. I could sure answer any questions. Thanks.
Don't appear to be any questions at this time. Thank you. So with that, he asked to be taken out of the queue.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah. We're going to adjourn. Thank you all.